The Dakota sun was a hammer, beating down on the Badlands like it wanted to pound everything flat. For Sarah Wilkins, it felt like the end of the world. She and her husband James had chased a dream all the way from Boston, a dream of open land and a new life. But 6 months on the trail had burned that dream down to dust and sweat. Their wagon creaked, a sound like an old man's bones. "James, are we lost?" Sarah's voice was thin, tired. He pointed a confident finger at a ridge shimmering in the heat. "The map's clear, Sarah. Just over that ridge, Peterson's settlement." He was always confident. It's what she'd loved about him. Now, it just felt like another lie the West had told them. "I wish we'd stayed in Bismarck," she muttered. The heat was a living thing, wrapping around her, choking the air from her lungs. "The land grant, Sarah," James said, his voice tight. "We had to settle it now. Think of it. No more city noise, just us." She tried to smile for him. She really did. But the silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was hungry. And then, a sound like a rifle shot cracked through the air. The world tilted sideways. The wagon lurched, throwing Sarah from her seat like a rag doll. James yelled her name, his hand reaching, fingers brushing hers for a heart-stopping second. And then she was falling, tumbling down a steep, rocky embankment, the world a blur of pain and dirt. Thorny bushes tore at her dress, at her skin. She landed hard at the bottom of a ravine, a white-hot poker of pain shooting through her back. She tried to push herself up. Nothing happened. She tried to move her legs. They wouldn't listen. It was like they weren't even hers anymore. A cold dread, colder than any Boston winter, washed over her. She couldn't feel anything below her waist. "James!" she screamed, her voice a raw, broken thing. "James, I can't move!" He was already scrambling down the slope, his face a mask of terror. "I'm coming, Sarah! Don't move!" A broken laugh escaped her lips. "I couldn't if I tried." Tears carved clean tracks through the grime on her face. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch her. "My God, Sarah, where does it hurt?" "My back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "James, I can't feel my legs." The fear in his eyes curdled into pure horror. He knew what this meant. Out here, miles from anywhere, a wound like this wasn't just an injury. It was a death sentence. He looked around wildly, as if he could will a doctor to appear from the empty, sun-baked landscape. "I'll get you to the wagon," he said, his voice shaking. "We'll find help. The settlement. It can't be far." As he lifted her, a scream tore from her throat, but she bit it back. The pain was a fire in her spine, but the numbness. The dead, empty numbness was worse. It was the feeling of her own grave. As he carried her up the hill, her gaze drifted to the endless horizon. So much empty space. She had never felt so small, so utterly alone. But she wasn't alone. High on a distant ridge, a lone figure on a painted horse watched them. Dark eyes followed their every move, a silent witness to their private hell. And they never even knew he was there. That night was a fever dream. The wagon was broken. One of the horses was lame. And Sarah was fading. She drifted in and out of a hot, painful haze. James sat beside her, bathing her forehead with a damp cloth, his face etched with a desperation that scared her more than her own injury. "I have to go for help," he whispered, mostly to himself. "At dawn, I'll ride to the settlement." Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "Don't leave me." The words were barely a breath, but they were filled with a lifetime of fear. "I have to," he said, his voice cracking. "You need a doctor, my love. I have to." He kissed her forehead, a promise he was terrified he couldn't keep. "I'll be back before nightfall." With a final look of anguish, he mounted their good horse, Duke, and rode toward the ridge. Sarah watched him shrink into a tiny speck and then disappear completely. The silence that rushed in to fill the space he left was deafening. She was alone, injured, in the middle of the merciless Badlands. She closed her eyes and prayed. but she didn't know who she was praying to anymore. James rode like a man possessed. The sun climbed, turning the sky into a brassy, unforgiving dome. Every minute he was away from Sarah felt like a blade twisting in his gut. He was her only hope. He couldn't fail. When he finally crested the ridge, his heart plummeted into his boots. This wasn't a settlement. It was a ghost town in the making. 3 ramshackle cabins, a sad-looking corral, and a building with a crooked sign that read, Walker's Trading Post. This was the promised land? This was a patch of dirt and despair. He stumbled off his horse, his legs weak, and pushed his way into the trading post. Dust motes danced in the dim light. The shelves were mostly bare. Behind a counter, a gray-haired man with eyes like chips of flint looked up from a ledger. "Help you?" The man grunted. "My wife," James gasped, his voice ragged. "There was an accident. Our wagon. She's hurt. Badly. She can't move her legs." The man, Walker, didn't even blink. "Ain't no doctor here. Nearest one's in Bismarck. 4-day ride." 4 days. The words hit James like a punch to the stomach. Sarah didn't have 4 days. "But there has to be someone," James pleaded. "Anyone. She might be dying." Walker shook his head, a slow, final gesture. "Folks around here look after their own. Got enough trouble without taking on more." He paused, his gaze cold and pragmatic. "Woman can't walk out here. That's as good as dead." A hot rage flared in James's chest. "She is my wife! I won't just let her die!" He slammed his fist on the counter, rattling a jar of dusty hardtack. 2 other men, who'd been nursing drinks in a corner, ambled over. "What's the fuss?" the older one asked, his beard stained with tobacco. James turned to them, his desperation raw. "My wife is paralyzed. I need help. I'll pay. I have money." The younger man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Ain't about money, mister. It's about winter. It's comin'. We lose a few days dragging your wife around, we could all starve." James looked from one hard face to the next. He saw no pity, no compassion, nothing. Just the cold calculus of survival. Walker sighed, a sound of weary impatience. "Look, mister, the best thing you can do for her is make her comfortable." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or end her suffering. Quick-like." The air left James's lungs. He staggered back, his mind reeling. You're telling me to kill my own wife?" The younger man shrugged. "We're practical folk. Sentiment'll get you killed out here." James backed away, a profound disgust choking him. These weren't people. They were monsters. "I'll find help somewhere else," he spat. "There is no somewhere else," Walker called after him as he stumbled out the door into the blinding sun. He leaned against the wall of the trading post, the world spinning around him. He had failed. He was going back to Sarah with nothing but a death sentence. Just as he was about to mount his horse, a woman's voice cut through his despair. "I heard about your wife." He turned. She was in her 40s, her face a roadmap of hardship, but her eyes held a flicker of something he hadn't seen all day. Kindness. "I'm Martha Evans," she said. "I can't do much. But I've got some willow bark for the pain, and clean bandages." Gratitude so fierce it brought tears to his eyes washed over him. "Thank you." She pressed a small bundle into his hands. "It won't heal her, but it might ease her a bit." "Why are you helping me?" James asked, his voice thick. Martha's eyes looked past him, at a memory. "Lost my own girl a couple winters back. No one to help her neither." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's talk," she whispered, "of a Comanche healer. They say he camps near a place called Spirit Rock, about a half-day's ride from here." James stared at her. "A Comanche?" "Most folks won't go near him," Martha continued, her voice low. "Don't trust him. But I've heard stories. That he can heal things our doctors can't. That he's brought people back from the dead." She gave a little shrug. "Probably just stories, but if you're desperate." Desperate didn't even begin to cover it. A tiny, wild spark of hope ignited in the ashes of his heart. "Spirit Rock," he said. "Can you tell me how to find it?" She gave him quick, furtive directions, glancing over her shoulder. "Don't tell anyone I told you, and don't get your hopes up. Comanches ain't got much reason to love white folks." James mounted Duke, his mind racing. A Comanche healer. It was insane. It was impossible. It was his only chance. He spurred his horse into a gallop, away from the soulless settlement and toward a future he couldn't even begin to imagine. He was riding to find a man he'd been taught to hate, to beg for the life of the woman he loved. And he had no idea that back at the wagon his wife was about to meet him. The sun bled out of the sky, leaving Sarah in a world of purple shadows and growing fear. James wasn't back. Had something happened? Was he lost? Or worse? The thought of dying alone out here was a physical weight on her chest. A coyote yipped in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed the emptiness in her soul. Then she heard it. A soft footstep. The crunch of a boot on gravel. "James?" she called out, her voice cracking with relief. But the figure that emerged from the twilight was not her husband. It was a silhouette against the dying light, tall and broad-shouldered, long, braided hair, the unmistakable profile of a Native American man. Terror, cold and absolute, seized her. The stories she'd heard as a child, tales of savage raids and brutal attacks, flooded her mind. She was paralyzed, defenseless. This was it. This was how she was going to die. The man stepped closer, his movements silent, graceful. He knelt beside the wagon, his face unreadable in the gloom. He just watched her. His dark eyes scanned her broken body, taking in the makeshift splint on the wagon wheel, the canteen lying empty beside her. To her utter shock, he reached out, not with a weapon, but with a water skin. He held it out to her. Her throat was so dry it felt like it was lined with sand. Thirst was a raging fire within her. Hesitantly, cautiously, she reached out and took it. The water was cool and clean, the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. Thank you," she stammered. "My husband. He went for help." The man said nothing. His gaze was intense, analytical. He reached forward and, with a touch that was surprisingly gentle, pressed his fingers against her legs. He moved up her shins, her knees, her thighs. He was looking for a reaction, a flicker, anything. There was nothing. His expression, which had been neutral, grew grave. He spoke, his voice low and accented. "Can't feel." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Tears welled in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "I can't." The man stood up, his tall frame blocking out the last of the light. He looked out at the horizon, as if consulting with the stars themselves. He seemed to come to a decision. He turned back to her, and spoke a single, cryptic word. "Wait." Then, as silently as he had appeared, he melted back into the darkness. Sarah was left alone, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of terror and a strange, new feeling she couldn't name. The water skin was still beside her, solid and real. It hadn't been a dream. She had been found. But she had no idea if she'd been rescued, or if she was just waiting for the rest of his tribe to arrive. James pushed his horse through the inky blackness, guided by the moon and a desperate prayer. Martha's directions were all he had. Find the rock that looks like a man's face. Look for a fire in the ravines. He was plunging into the heart of territory that settlers were warned to avoid at all costs. He knew the stories, he knew the risks, but the image of Sarah, pale and broken in the back of that wagon, burned away all his fear. There it was, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky. Spirit Rock. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. He was close. He dismounted, leading Duke by the reins, moving as quietly as he could. After what felt like an eternity, he saw it. A faint, flickering orange glow from a sheltered canyon below. A campfire. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. He was about to walk into a Comanche camp, alone at night, and beg for a miracle. As he got closer, a voice barked out a sharp command in a language he didn't understand. He froze, his hands shooting up into the air. "I'm looking for help," he called out, his voice trembling. "My wife. She's hurt. I was told there's a healer here." A figure stepped out of the shadows, and James's blood ran cold. A young warrior, no older than 20, held a rifle leveled directly at his chest. His eyes were hard, filled with a deep, simmering hatred. "White man brings trouble," the warrior said, his English broken but his meaning crystal clear. "Go away." "Please," James begged, taking a half-step forward. "My wife is paralyzed. She's going to die." "Not our problem," the young man snarled. "White people take our land, kill our buffalo, give us sickness. Now you want help?" Before James could answer, a second voice spoke from the darkness behind the warrior. It was an older voice, calm and full of authority. An argument erupted between the two men in their own tongue. The younger man was angry, gesturing wildly, but the older man's voice was low and steady. Finally, with a grunt of disgust, the young warrior lowered his rifle. An older man stepped into the firelight. He was tall, straight-backed, with streaks of gray in his long black hair. His face was a mask of wisdom and sorrow. "I am Tawakoni Jim," he said. His English perfect, refined. "Some call me a healer. My people say I know the old ways. Why should I help your wife?" The question was a bucket of ice water. James had expected to plead, to bargain, not to justify his wife's existence. Because she's suffering," he stammered. "She's innocent." Tawakoni Jim's expression didn't change. "Many innocents suffer. My people suffer. Why is your wife's suffering more important?" James felt his world tilting. How could he answer that? "It's not," he said, the words tearing out of him. "It's just, I love her. I would do anything to save her. Anything." The healer's eyebrow arched slightly. "Would you give your life for hers?" "Yes," James said, without a flicker of hesitation. "Would you give your land, your horse, everything you own?" "All of it," James swore. The healer studied him, his eyes boring into James's very soul, searching for the lie. "White men make many promises," Tawakoni Jim said softly. "They blow away like smoke." "I'm not promising as a white man," James said, his voice raw with emotion. "I'm promising as a husband." A long, heavy silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. The young warrior watched, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. Finally, Tawakoni Jim gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I will come. I will see your wife." He promised nothing more, but it was enough. Relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over James. "Thank you. Thank you." The healer turned and said something to the young warrior, whose face darkened with rage. After a short, sharp exchange, the young man spun on his heel and stalked off into the night. "That is Nakota," Tawakoni Jim explained. "He does not agree. His father was killed by soldiers last year." "I'm sorry," James said, and he meant it. "Words are wind," the healer said, turning to gather supplies into a leather bag. "Where is your wife?" James explained the location, and Tawakoni Jim nodded. "I know the place. We leave at first light." "But she's alone," James protested. "We have to go now." "Night travel in the Badlands is for fools and ghosts," the healer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your wife needs you strong, not dead. Rest." Every fiber of his being screamed to ride back to Sarah, but he knew the man was right. He sank down by the fire, his mind a chaotic storm of hope and fear. As the sun crested the horizon, they set out. Tawakoni Jim, James, and a sullen Nakota, who had returned in the night, his eyes still burning with resentment. He was clearly there only to protect the old healer. As they rode, James felt a strange sense of unreality. He was riding alongside two Comanche warriors, his wife's life hanging in the balance. By mid-morning, he started recognizing the landscape. His heart began to pound. They were close. As they were about to crest the final ridge overlooking the ravine, Nakota suddenly threw up a hand, his body going rigid. "Someone is there," he hissed, pointing. James's eyes followed his finger. He could just make out a figure moving around the wagon. A settler? Maybe from Walker's? Had they had a change of heart? Hope surged through him, and he kicked his horse into a run, ignoring Tawakoni Jim's shout to wait. He raced down the slope, his heart in his throat. As he got closer, the figure by the wagon straightened up, and James's blood froze. It wasn't a settler. It was a Comanche warrior. He looked almost identical to Tawakoni Jim, but younger, his face marked with different scars, and he was standing right beside Sarah's wagon. Rage and terror, primal and absolute, exploded in James's chest. It was a trap. They had led him away so they could. He didn't let himself finish the thought. He pulled his horse to a skidding halt, his hand flying to the small pistol he kept in his belt. "Get away from her!" he screamed, his voice raw. From inside the wagon, he heard Sarah's weak voice call his name. "James! It's all right! He's helping me!" James stared, confused, his gun still aimed at the stranger. The man just looked at him, his expression calm. "I am Ekapita," he said. "I found your woman. She was suffering." Just then, Tawakoni Jim and Nakota rode up behind him, and the scene became even more bizarre. Tawakoni Jim stared at Ekapita. "Brother," he said, his voice tight with an emotion James couldn't read. They were brothers. The two men immediately began speaking rapidly in Comanche, their voices rising and falling. It was clearly an argument, a serious one. James scrambled off his horse and rushed to Sarah's side. She was pale, exhausted, but her eyes were clear. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" "No, James," she said, gripping his hand. "He brought me water. He made a tea. It helped with the pain." She looked past him at the two arguing brothers. "Who is the older one?" "The healer," James said, his head spinning. "Tawakoni Jim, the man who found you. That's his brother." The argument outside grew more intense. Nakota watched them both, his hand on his knife, looking like he was ready for a war to break out. Finally, Tawakoni Jim turned from his brother and walked to the wagon. His face was like a stone mask. "My brother says your wife's spine is broken," he said, with no preamble. "The feeling may never return." The words were like a physical blow. James felt the last of his hope crumble. "But you can fix it, can't you?" he begged. "There has to be something." "There are ways," Tawakoni Jim said slowly. "Poultices, herbs, to bring down the swelling. But it takes time. Weeks, maybe longer." "Weeks," James whispered. "And my brother and I," the healer said, his eyes flicking back to Ekapita. "We do not agree on whether to help you at all." Ekapita stepped forward. "She will die if we do not help," he said, his English thick but forceful. "She is innocent." "No white person is innocent," Nakota spat from his horse. "Their existence is a crime against our people." "Enough!" Tawakoni Jim's voice was like a whip crack. He turned back to James. "We have a camp, a few hours from here. There is fresh water. It is a better place for healing. We will take her there, if you agree to our price." "I have money," James said quickly. "We do not want your money," Ekapita said. "We want a promise." "What promise?" It was Tawakoni Jim who answered, his eyes locking onto James's. "If we heal her," he said, "you will tell the truth about us. You will go back to your people and tell them we are not savages. You will tell them that we helped you when your own kind left you to die." James looked at Sarah, at her pale, hopeful face. He looked at these men who held her life in their hands. "I swear it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The two brothers looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them. A truce. An agreement. Tawakoni Jim gave a single, sharp nod. "We will help." As they began to construct a travois, a sort of sled, to carry Sarah, James saw Nakota pull his horse away from the group, his face a thundercloud of fury. James walked over to him. "Thank you," he said. Nakota sneered. "I do not help you. I obey Tawakoni Jim. He is like a father to me." He leaned down from his horse, his voice a low, venomous hiss. The white man's whiskey killed my mother. The white man's bullets killed my father. Why should I believe your promises mean anything? The raw grief in the young man's voice was staggering. I can't change what happened, James said softly. I can only be responsible for what I do now. Nakota stared at him for a long, hard moment. We will see, he said. We will see what kind of man you are. They gently loaded Sarah onto the travois. Her world was a swaying, painful blur. She reached for James's hand. Do you trust them? She whispered. James looked at the three Comanche men. Tawakoni Jim, the wise healer. Ekapita, the compassionate brother. Nakota, the grieving warrior. These people he had been taught his entire life to fear and hate. They were now his wife's only hope. Yes, he said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. I think I do. Their journey into the heart of the Comanche camp was like entering another world. They left the scorched, open plains and descended into a hidden valley, a slash of impossible green carved into the brown landscape. A spring-fed pool glittered like a jewel, and around it stood several teepees. As they arrived, the camp fell silent. Women stopped their work, children paused their games, all eyes turning to the strange procession. Two white settlers, brought in not as captives, but as patients. An old woman with a face like a dried apple and eyes as sharp as a hawk's came forward. She and Tawakoni Jim spoke, her gestures conveying a sense of urgency and concern as she looked at Sarah. This is my mother, Queenie, Tawakoni Jim said to James. She is a great healer. She says to bring your wife to her teepee where it is cool. They carried Sarah inside. The air was filled with the scent of drying herbs. It was clean, calm, and peaceful. Queenie examined Sarah with hands that were gnarled with age but moved with an expert's precision. After a long, careful assessment, she spoke to her son. My mother says the bone in her back is broken, Tawakoni Jim translated, his voice grave. There is much swelling. It pinches the spirit paths to her legs. If we can make the swelling go down, the feeling may return. A flicker of hope ignited in James's chest. And if it doesn't? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tawakoni Jim met his eyes, his gaze unflinching. Then she will never walk again. The days that followed were a blur of strange routines and potent medicines. They applied poultices made of crushed leaves and mud to Sarah's back, changing them every few hours. They gave her bitter teas that eased the pain and brought down the fever. Queenie massaged her lifeless legs for hours every day, humming ancient songs. We must keep the muscles alive, Tawakoni Jim explained, so they are ready, if the feeling returns. They even built a frame of wood over her bed so she could use her arms to pull herself up, keeping her upper body strong. Sarah, freed from the constant agonizing pain, began to revive. Her spirit, which had been so close to breaking, started to mend. She learned a few words of Comanche, bringing a smile to Queenie's face. James was put to work. He wasn't a guest, he was earning their keep. He fetched water, chopped wood, and learned to hunt rabbits with a snare. He was clumsy, inept, a city man lost in a world he didn't understand. Nakota watched his every move with contempt. One evening, as James struggled to start a fire the Comanche way, rubbing two sticks together until his hands were raw, Nakota appeared beside him. You do it wrong, he said, his voice flat. He took the sticks, and with a few deft, practiced motions, a wisp of smoke appeared, which he gently blew into a flame. Thank you, James said, genuinely grateful. You work hard, Nakota grunted, a flicker of something other than hatred in his eyes. Not lazy, like other whites. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given. Then, a week later, something happened that changed everything. James, Sarah whispered one morning, her eyes wide. I felt something. What? What did you feel? A tingle, she said, her voice filled with awe. In my toes, just for a second. Tawakoni Jim warned him not to hope for too much. The body could play tricks. But then it happened again. And again. One afternoon, As Queenie was massaging her feet, Sarah let out a gasp. "Look," she breathed, and with a monumental effort of will, she wiggled the toes on her left foot. It was a tiny movement, barely perceptible, but it was a miracle. Tawakoni Jim allowed himself a rare, thin smile. "The swelling goes down," he said. "The path is clearing." From that day on, her progress was slow, but it was steady. A faint sensation in her ankle, the ability to tense a muscle in her calf. Each tiny victory was a cause for celebration. A month after they arrived, Sarah, gripping the wooden frame above her bed, managed to bend her left knee. Tears streamed down her face, down James's face. He hugged her gently, his heart feeling like it would burst with a gratitude so immense it was painful. "These people," he whispered into her hair, "they've given me back my life." "No," Sarah said softly, "they've helped me find my own." That evening, James sat with Tawakoni Jim by the fire, watching the stars appear in the vast, dark sky. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," James said. "Your promise," the healer reminded him. "Tell the truth." "I will," James vowed, "but it's not enough." Tawakoni Jim was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "There may be another way. Your wife, she has the spirit of a healer. My mother says she has the touch. She learns our medicine ways quickly." He looked at James, his dark eyes serious. "If you were to stay for the winter, she could learn more. She could become a bridge between our worlds. A healer for your people, using the knowledge of ours." James was stunned. They would share their sacred knowledge? With them? After everything our people have done to you? "Knowledge is not like land," Tawakoni Jim said. "Sharing it does not leave us with less. Perhaps, if we share our ways, there will be less hate." The next morning, James saw Nakota preparing to go hunting. On an impulse, he walked over. "Can I come with you?" he asked. Nakota looked at him, surprised. Then a look of cold assessment. Finally, a curt nod. "Keep up," he said, "or I leave you." It was the hardest day of James's life. Nakota pushed him, tested him, running him ragged through the canyons. But James refused to give up. By the end of the day, exhausted and bleeding, he had helped Nakota bring down a deer. As they were dressing the animal, Nakota spoke. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A weak man, an arrogant man," Nakota said, not looking at him. "The white men I have known. They take. They do not give." "I was taught that all Indians were savages," James admitted quietly. "I was wrong." Nakota looked at him then, a long, searching look. "Tawakoni Jim says you may stay the winter." "We're thinking about it," James confirmed. "If you stay," Nakota said slowly, deliberately, "I will teach you how to hunt, how to track, so you are not so clumsy." It was an offer of peace, an offer of friendship, and James knew in that moment that their lives had been changed forever. When they returned to camp, Sarah was sitting up, propped against the tepee, her face glowing. "James, watch," she said. With a slow, trembling, deliberate motion, she moved both of her legs. It was a small movement, but it was everything. He knelt beside her, his joy too big for words. That night, they told Tawakoni Jim they would stay. A few days later, the tribe held a ceremony. James and Sarah were no longer guests. They were family. Nakota came forward and pressed a small carved wooden fox into Sarah's hand. "For strength," he said gruffly, "and cunning, you will need both to walk again." As winter fell, blanketing the Badlands in a peaceful shroud of white, a strange new life began. A white woman was learning the ancient healing arts of the Comanche, and her husband was learning the ways of a warrior from a young man who was supposed to be his mortal enemy. They had come west seeking a piece of land. Instead, they had found a home. They had come seeking opportunity. Instead, they had found a purpose. Their old life was gone, abandoned in a broken wagon on a forgotten ridge. But a new life, a richer and more meaningful life, had just begun. They had fallen into a ravine. and thought it was the end. But it turned out to be the beginning of their true journey. They learned that sometimes you have to lose everything you think you want to find everything you truly need. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of survival and unexpected justice. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in James's situation. Thanks for watching.